Good morning, Andreas.
Good morning, Olivier.
How are you doing?
I'm fine, although we have really shitty weather over here.
Don't worry, you're not alone.
Where are you based actually right now?
I'm in Brussels. I'm
You're
in
in
Brussels.
Brussels. Okay,
Yeah,
fine.
I'm Brussels
I'm
based.
fine.
And the weather is always the same in Brussels, so you're never disappointed. You
Yeah,
know what's coming.
it's expectation management, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's always very clear.
Yeah, but we have really nice weather, dry, everything fine, but now it has changed rapidly, and we have all these floodings. In former times it was just rain. Now it's always a natural incident,
I
and
know. I
yeah,
might be talking about this actually.
yeah. It's a difficult question whether it's weather or climate or something in between, but you just recognize, yeah. And the insurances, they should know best, because they do the calculations on all of this, and yeah.
And that's probably why the insurance are investing massively in climate change mitigation.
Yeah,
I think they're pretty smart.
yeah, very
A bit
likely.
late, but okay.
Yeah, this is true. But it's just and it is not only that the weather is like this, but also the traffic policy in Frankfurt is really, really difficult. We
Oh,
have
really?
green
Why is
green
that?
we have a strong green party here, so
Okay,
and
yeah,
they basically they very much interfere in all these traffic stuff. So once you had two lanes, coming into Frankfurt, getting especially at rush hours, and now there's only one left because the other one is
yeah,
is
yeah,
uh,
yeah.
reserved for bicycles and these new I don't know what it's called. So transport bikes, like bikes that have something to carry
Oh,
the
yeah,
kids
cargo
and your
bikes.
household in all in
Yeah,
with you when you're on a bike. And yeah, so
cargo
this makes
bikes.
it quite
Yeah.
difficult. I mean, there's just recently there was something in the newspaper that says, okay, if you're living outside of Frankfurt, you have a problem with the public transportation not working. Because Deutsche Bahn is not reliable, all the locals are not reliable. So if, like me, if you live around Frankfurt, you
Yeah.
cannot come in with open public transportation. But when you're in Frankfurt, you have a problem with being in a car. Yeah. So
Uh,
yeah. Anyway, yeah, we have to change, and we also have to change our minds, not only our behavior, but yeah. And this is what I know is it cannot be done quickly. Whatever I learned also from when we have discussions about mergers and things like
yeah.
this, like now we have this UniCredit Commerzbank thing going. It is mostly it's about the people. And if it's not working, it's mostly not
Absolutely right.
working because the people have a problem because it was not properly communicated or whatever. And in history, and I'm doing like banking for 30 years now, it is always the same. When mergers are not working, it's only because of the people who are managing it and who are the people who are managed.
I think you're entirely right.
Yeah.
Entirely right.
Yes.
The funny thing, though, is that, well, you're not the only one to be right. I think a lot of us have understood that,
Mm,
how,
mm,
explaining it very well. However, we're not changing that much. We're
mm.
not adapting to what we know, which is a very strange thing. I wish I would be a brain scientist and not a lawyer, actually. You know.
Yeah, but maybe is helpful. Yeah, I mean, um, yeah, it's a lot of decisions are made for whatever reasons. For Frankfurt, we are thinking about the financial center a lot, and what is our
Yeah, of
position and so
course.
on, and how can
Mhm.
we compete. So competitiveness is the name of the game these days, and
Yeah.
so we are in competition with not really with London, but with Paris and others, and like Liechtenstein, and then we see that Liechtenstein, for Luxembourg, for example,
Yeah.
has given tax advantages to high who people in banking who earn very lot of money, because these
Yeah.
are the decision people. They bring their departments and so on. So they're basically looking at them, and they have tax advantages and so on and so on. And sometimes I think, well, maybe the smartest decision would not be to decide for Luxembourg, but if you as a single person have such a great advantage from this, of course this is influencing this. Yeah, and
Yeah.
yeah, and in Germany you don't talk about tax exemptions for bankers who earn a lot of money. Is a topic you better don't touch. Yeah, obviously in Luxembourg it's not a big problem.
Yeah. Less
Yeah.
taboos. Small country.
Yeah. It's quite interesting. I think. Well, I mean, it's quite interesting the topic you're really coming up with, because this
Good.
is in the end it's a lot of ideology, but if this works or not is in the end a matter of the figures. For asset managers who have to bring profit to the investors and so on. So they all are willing to, and the but is very much in the accounting sometimes.
True. Yeah. I'll say a few words actually on the reporting and
Hmm.
the reporting standards. But
Yeah.
did you see the slides actually?
Yeah, I saw them, and I understand your point about the few pictures you have in here, and but I think maybe it also works without showing Macron and Trump, because I know these guys are not in the public databases. So in many cases you can substitute with license free, but those people you don't get
Yeah.
free. Just that's a problem. So maybe we can have a look after that, and yeah, make
Okay.
sure
Well,
it's
happy
it's
to.
proof. It's proof.
Okay, happy to look at, finding license-free pictures. I can ask a colleague, one of my communication colleagues, to look into that. But
Yeah, it's just a
yeah.
few, and I think at least this the things that you when you have been doing this, I don't think you find a proper solution in with license free stuff. But
Okay.
yeah, let's
Ah,
see,
well,
let's see.
good.
Mhm.
So how many people do you have this morning for
Um,
breakfast?
I wonder. I think we have around uh, a little less than 50, I think. It's
Okay, good.
45 or 46 or something,
Good.
was the latest. And there's, interestingly enough, there's always, people coming in like 5 to 9 or something, because some people think that the link we send is the link to the webinar. And although we write many times, this is a link for registration. And once you're registered, you get the link for the webinar. It's always the same. So some people even come late for that reason. But the thing is, I'm not quite sure. It's the no-show rate, unfortunately, is high depending on the day, and depending on, yeah, not really the time. The time is right. So we try to do this in the afternoon. We try to do this in the evenings, like 6 to 7, which is not a good idea. So the time has proven to be best, but yeah, for the rest, it's just it's always also a matter whether uh, whether we can target the right people, because the people I have in my registration list is not always from controlling or whatever. They are, mostly communication people, and I always
Okay,
ask
okay.
him, please hand over to your colleague.
All right. Okay.
And
Yeah.
but for example, we informed the ISSB about this. We informed the accountant organization here in Germany about doing this. So
PW. Yeah.
we
Yeah, we
spread the
did too,
news.
actually. Yeah, we did too. I think we sent a reminder yesterday. I understand. But that's, I think that's the new trend. I think people decide even their holidays at the last minute. So why would they decide, on business beforehand?
Yeah, but it's not only on webinars where you can sneak in and out without anyone knowing. Just a second, I need
Yes,
to
please
to
go
check.
ahead.
But it's let's see whether it's better like this. Yeah. Um, but it's also when we have seated dinners. Yeah, we just Was it yesterday? No, the night before we had IOPA,
Yeah.
a reception for IOPA that we are doing every year with like 100 people seated, dinner with name cards and everything, So we tell them it's highly official, and then you have like 15 people just not showing up without telling, without anything. So this is what it makes me frustrated. There's a lot of effort, a lot of money, also preparation in
Mm.
doing this, and everybody knows if you have arranged one of these events, and it's a lot of logistics,
Yeah, it
and
is.
then just not showing up is really no respect. Yeah,
Yeah.
unrespectful.
Well, we're running a event business as well in parallel with Accountancy Europe, and it's really a trend, and I don't think the trend will change. I
mm,
think it's
mm,
habits, were developed gradually and really bursted out with COVID,
yeah,
and that's what it
yeah,
is.
yeah,
We're thinking
right.
about charging the
Yeah,
no-shows,
yeah.
even for
It's
pre-events.
you should try at least, but then you charge them like 20 euros or whatever, and you go after this, and you don't use them for 20 euros. So just the only thing you can do is if someone does this once or twice, you kick him out of the mailing list and say, okay, it's not worth it. But yeah,
Yeah,
you're right. It was due to COVID, basically.
partly, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. This was when everything changed, when we came from the webinars came up, and life was gone. And yeah.
Is the camera
Anyway,
okay?
the camera is fine. I can hear you well.
Okay,
You
good.
have a neutral background, so everything fine. Looks good. Actually, I think I can get people in now.
Okay. And
Yeah.
I will ask you to move the slides, right?
Yeah, I'll do the slides. I'll share after my opening remarks, and
Very
yeah,
good.
just stay like this, and just be aware that from now on we are public here.
Ready to go?
Okay, thank you. Bye bye. See, not bye bye. See you later.
No, 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 you don't want me to log out.
Okay, okay. I start here. Good morning. It's almost 9 o'clock here in Frankfurt. I see more people coming in, so we wait for another 1 or 2 minutes. Okay, it's time to start. Good morning again from Frankfurt. Dear guests from numerous countries and regions, welcome to our 52nd Food for Thought event in cooperation with the Association of Foreign Banks in Germany. A big thanks to our partner. Today, Frankfurt is again 1 hour ahead of London. Let's make the best of it. Three letters have demanded a great deal of attention from companies, consumers, and investors in recent years: E, S, and G. Regulators and governments constantly telling financial institutions and corporations that EBITDA and free cash flow are no longer the only measures of competitiveness. In addition, you must also demonstrate your ESG policies and implementation. And we are pleased to see that the concept of sustainable development has become increasingly popular among all sectors of society. Accountants and auditors play a special role in helping companies to better tell their green story. One helping them to write a storyline according to specific requirements, and the other verifying the veracity of the story on behalf of the general audience and readers. Together, accounting and auditing professionals contribute to the advancement of ESG by fostering a culture of responsibility and accountability within organizations. We have gathered here today with Olivier Boutellis-Taft, CEO of Accountancy Europe, an organization that unites 50 professional partners from 35 countries that represent 1 million qualified accountants, auditors, and advisors. Olivier will present some thought-provoking ideas on the relevance and effectiveness of traditional risk management in the face of growing environmental and climate disruptions. He will question the effectiveness of our current responses to the climate and water crisis, explore potential improvements, and discuss their implications for businesses. As dessert, he will discuss corporate reporting and how well it encourages change, and he will examine some common biases that affect decision-making. Dear audience, please feel free to input your questions during or after the speech in the Q&A section in Zoom. We will discuss them after the speech. Please kindly note that our webinar today applies Chatham House rules. We appreciate for your understanding. So far, welcome. Olivier, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Andreas, and good morning, everybody. I'd just like to say that the title, I think, Food for Thought, is very, very much spot on. This is exactly what we need today. We need to rethink. And I think for that, your program is very interesting and very useful. So I would like to first run you through a short reminder, I would say, of the situation that we face, to then move on to what we're doing to address it and how we need to precisely rethink. So, if we move on to the next slide, just as a reminder, the scientific community has been very much on the climate, and more broadly, we can move on to the next slide, Andreas. So the scientific community has been on the issue since the end of the 19th century, something that we very often forget, actually, okay? And already there, I think, the impact of carbon emissions and the impact of our extraction of natural resources was identified as a defining issue. And while scientific circles have reached one of the broadest consensus in history, it seems that on the other end, we still have a number of people who don't really get it and who still seem to be surprised with the issue and actually the foundations of the issue. Can move on to the next slide, Andreas. And I think the question, or the thing that we very often hear, is that this is a problem for future generations. Well, it was true at the end of the 19th century when these, Swedish scientists actually was ringing the alarm bell already. But now it's not a problem for future generations. It's really a problem for our generation. and it is a business problem and a finance problem. I mean, everybody, I'm sure, have been following the dreadful floods in Austria, your neighboring country. The cost estimates are rocketing high, and we're now talking about something that will be above 1 billion euros. So I think this is a very actual problem. If we move on to the next slide now, I think it's also not, contrary to what we very often think, an isolated problem. Climate is actually only part of the equation. This is the framework defined by the Stockholm Resilience Center, a group of scientists that have identified 9 systemic boundaries of the Earth system, basically what makes the Earth an habitable planet. And today, we have already crossed 6 of these 9 boundaries, which shows that climate, while receiving all due attention, is by far not the only issue. And all these issues are connected. And now there is a very worrying thought developing in the scientific community that what we are impacting today in reality is the very conditions that make life possible on the planet. That should be sufficiently motivating to address, I believe. Moving on to the next slide. Thank you, Andreas. Very often, I think we need to go back to the basics and look at how, despite all the speeches, all the international agreement, look at how things are progressing. And if you see on these slides, and I should have added the different, international agreements and the conclusions of the COP, because it shows that they have had very limited impact on our global carbon emissions. What paradoxically maybe has had an impact is actually what has impacted our economy, like the global financial crisis or the COVID pandemic. Something that I believe meets, the title of your program, Food for Thought, and something on which I think we should really reflect. Moving on to the next slide, Andreas. Thank you. There are regular updates to the reports of the IPCC, and the latest one last year actually shows that all indicators are actually growing. So the situation in reality continues deteriorating. Next slide. And I think that raises questions, and that's really what I would like to talk about today, on how we are assessing risk. And I think our risk paradigm today is maybe slightly outdated. I mean, it's very often said that climate risk and the overall environmental risk is unprecedented. It, I believe, is also the new nature. But the way we are looking at risk remains more or less the same. So primarily, when we look at risk, the only thing we're interested in is our own risk. And I would even say that in business, when we are doing proper risk management and our competitor is not, we find this a pretty good thing at the end of the day, because it makes us more competitive. But the way we look at risk is really only from a very, very self-centered perspective, usually. Yes, of course, we look at counterparty risk, we look at supply chain risk, but at the end of the day, we're not looking at it from a systemic perspective, we're looking at it from a self-centered perspective. And there's always this very maybe overconfident assumption that risk is manageable, insurable, and can be externalized, which is, the main practices basically that we are used to using when it comes to risk management. The way we're measuring risk remains still mostly backward-looking, and it's focused really on what I call, the knowns unknowns, to quote a famous State Secretary of the United States of America. But the funny thing here is that today, I mean, climate risk is really a known known, and we're still not really managing it appropriately because it continues growing. So the point here, and again, back to food for thought, is really that the way we're looking at risk is full of cognitive bias, but despite our adoration for rationality, we are still victims of. And I think that is really something that tells me in a way that maybe we need a few more neuroscientists and psychologists in advising us on the way we do business, because obviously very often the problem is our brain. Next slide, please. So what I think has changed in risk? Well, to my view, it is really the nature of risk. First of all, risk, as we see it today, has been growing in occurrence, but also dropping in predictability. It is a clear reference to the work of Nicholas Taleb with the black swan that I'm sure is known to many of you. But I think we are increasingly running black swan risk. And these are, as we know, very difficult to predict and very difficult to measure. The one thing that we should always keep in mind is that climate is not behaving as many other risks in a way. There is a lot of inertia in the system. Therefore, what we're doing today will continue having an impact for decades to come. And that is why the risk needs to be managed very seriously now. But our risk management will only produce effects later on. That actually should be motivating us rather than demotivating us. And also in climate, there are unknown tipping points, but basically carry out the risk of totally shifting the system and bringing it out of control. These tipping points we know exist. We don't know exactly where they are and when we will be crossing them. And I don't like Russian roulette, and I think I would prefer that we take a very preventive action on risk. Otherwise, it will escape our control. I mentioned the planetary boundaries earlier, and I think what the planetary boundaries really show is that everything is connected, and there are lots of feedback loops and interdependencies within the system that also increase actually the magnitude of the risk. So at the end of the day, what I think is important that we understand, and that's really a significant change in the way we should look at risk, is that even if I am the best-in-class risk manager at the level of my organization, in reality, my risk will continue to be as high as the poorest risk manager in the system. We are all in this together. I mean, planet Earth is a little bit like a boat, lost in the ocean. And everybody on the boat carries out the same risk, whether they are a good, salesman or not. So that means that the risk we have is now clearly systemic, not systemic, as systemic banks, for instance, but systemic at the entire level of the Earth system, systemic in the sense that it impacts all the different business lines, all the different walks of life. And again, I mentioned earlier that today there is a growing consensus in the scientific community that this risk is of an exceptional magnitude because it impacts basically our capacity to live on this planet. And I don't think, despite our explorations of planet Mars, that this is a real option. Next slide, please, Andreas. So maybe if still some of you are not convinced, I have this little risk matrix that I think is interesting, especially to those who continue maybe believing that this risk is largely overstated. I think it is a little bit betting again, okay? And what I think is important to understand is that if we are ready for this risk and we're preparing, and we find out that at the end of the day it was largely overstated, well, we're still on the safe side. We're still on the safe side, and we even have benefits, even if the risk doesn't occur. Our management of this risk, our change in the way we do business carries out a number of benefits in terms of cost reduction, increased efficiency, innovation, and today, a lot of reputation benefits. But conversely, if we're not ready, and as we are today, and the risk actually occurs, it may well be fatal to our business and to our societies. Moving on to the next slide, Andreas. So I think this really calls for a new approach. I mean, of course, we look at companies and their value chain, and we should continue doing so. But I think we need to look at entire sectors, at entire regions, at entire system, if not at the economy as a whole. We need to better understand all the interaction and interdependencies actually that we see in these systems, and better understand the obstacles to change that we have to manage. We now, because of the situation that we face, remember the slide on the planetary boundaries. We really need to think in terms of resilience and mitigation, sure, but also adaptation, because it is taking place now. If I look, for instance, at France, lately it was found that the harvest of wheat would be cut by 1/3 this year because of climate. Not so much because of heat, but because of floods and rainfalls. And by the way, a recent scientific survey found that now rain is toxic or includes toxic elements, toxic chemicals on the entire surface of the planet. So that basically means, if we think mitigation and adaptation, that we need to fundamentally transform the way we do business. And I think what is important in this transformation is that we move away mentally from our assumption that things will carry on, that the exceptional now can happen, and we need to be prepared for the unexpected. So I personally see only one way of doing that. It is really to engage in collaborative action and involve all stakeholders of our businesses, all the stakeholders of society, because only collaborative action rather than competition will help us efficiently manage this risk. That brings us back, maybe some of you remember the days of the internet revolution at the turn of the century. We had forged this beautiful neologism, co-opetition. And I think that's pretty much part of the solution. Next slide, please. Thank you, Andreas. And I would just like to talk about, what in a company I created 2 years ago, we have developed in terms of collaborative approaches. We call these transition labs. I think it's important to understand that while regulators are asking for transition plans, which is really, at the end of the day, I think, your business plan, no less, no more. I think it is important that these transition plans actually take a systemic dimension and not only be centered on you and yourself, and that we develop tools to actually adapt these transition plans as we go. And that's why we have developed what we call these transition labs, which are basically projects that are always multi-stakeholder, and where all stakeholders together collaboratively learn on how to manage their risk and their transformation, and how to do that at system level so that it is effective and lasting. Next slide. Thank you, Andreas. So that's some of the tools that we are developing. I will not insist on that. But what is interesting, I think, is that these tools were developed with one of our partners, that is UCL, University College London, that contributed quite a lot of thinking in these tools. And interestingly, I always find this telling. The people who actually helped us from UCL were neuroscientists and psychologists, because again, and another reference to food for thought, what we need to change is really the way we think. So moving on, Andreas. Thank you. I think, when we want to transform things, what is important is data. It's knowing what we do, basically. And I'm sure that every one of you on this breakfast webinar have heard the famous Peter Drucker quote, "What gets measured gets done." The only small problem is that Peter Drucker actually never said that. And there's been lots of research actually on the quote, and it's interesting to see that this is one of these fake quotes running around the internet, but that actually the gentleman never said and never thought. You have on the slide actually what a journalist made of Peter Drucker's thinking, and I think it's important, especially the second point, which is that when we measure something that is actually pointless, it is counterproductive. And I think that's really at the heart of how we should also look at measurement. And you have in the bottom, for those who later on will want to read it, the real quote of Peter Drucker. And it is quite interesting, but in reality, his quote is precisely about the stuff that we cannot measure and how we need to handle it. Moving on, Andreas. Thank you. So all of you have now had to deal with the ESRS, the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. So that is the first set of standards. There's more to come because we are now looking into the standard specifics, into the sector-specific standards. Now, everybody right now almost complains about the mass of data points that are required, more than 1,000, as you see. And yes, this is new, and yes, this is difficult to collect and difficult to handle. But I think the question here is not necessarily about quantity, it's about purpose, and it's about usefulness. Moving on, please, Andreas. So I think when it comes to reporting, we first have to admit that it's not a magic bullet. I mean, there are plenty of other tools that are far more effective in creating change, tools that we don't necessarily like as well, which are in the realm of taxation, product specification. I mean, these are tools that have proved to be extremely effective in transforming, what we do. But the other question, I think, that today's debate on reporting raises is also regarding tipping points. And you could wonder where actually tipping points are and when actually too much reporting actually becomes ineffective. I was talking recently to a group of large companies who are about to produce their ESRS report. And it was actually striking for me to hear a number of them say that the amount of resources that is absorbed by reporting is actually drawing away these resources from doing the real thing, which is transforming their business and decarbonizing. And I think for me, that is a very worrying signal from business that we need to hear. And there is another debate, and I think this debate in Frankfurt is particularly acute, which is around the number of standards that certain large companies will have to apply, ESRS and the ISSB international standards. But at the end of the day, I think what we need to remember, and we've already learned this with financial reporting, I mean, more transparency does not, more reports does not necessarily means more transparency. When the information is buried down, it is very difficult to learn from the information. And also, more reporting and more transparency is not necessarily meaningful. And that is what is necessary. What we need is meaningful transformation. And it's only once you've done this meaningful transformation that you can report on actually its outcomes. And I think it is very important not to put the cart before the horses. Yes, reporting can be a very important spur in getting people to transform, but you can only report on what you've done. And I think, again, reporting is placed at entity level, very difficult to do otherwise. Well, I think the problem we're facing now is not at entity level, it is at system level. So I think the one thing that we need to remember, all of us in our respective sector, is that we cannot transition alone. We cannot do that on our own. We have to do this collectively as a system. Andreas, we can move to the next slide. And I think there is something that we need to ask ourselves, because I sometimes have the impression that especially those of us who are highly educated and have moved on to school, from school to pretty abstract business, have sometimes lost track of reality. And I think when we are in a burning house, we're not start discussing how to measure the temperature of the fire. We don't start discussing how we will, decorate the new house. We just have to escape. And we need to get real, I think, with the issues we are dealing with. And I think when it comes to reporting on data that we use to manage our businesses, we are a little bit in a house on fire. So we need to really ask ourselves, what is the data that I really, really need? When do I need it? I mean, when the house is on fire, it's very often too late to carry out the analysis. And the more information you have, the less the analysis will be easy. So the question in reality, and that sounds counterintuitive, I know, to many people, it's how accurate do we need this information to be? When you are in an emergency situation, I think what you need is a rough indicator that pushes you in the right direction. That does not necessarily mean scientific precision at the last digit. So next slide, please, Andreas. And I think that is going to be my concluding slide. And there is no good presentation without quoting Albert Einstein. And I'm afraid that, again, this is a fake quote, but it is so telling that I thought I would nonetheless use it. And I would really ask you at Food for Thought to meditate on this quote. We cannot solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. And I'm afraid that very often this is exactly what we're doing today. Thank you very much. It's great to have this opportunity to talk to you. I'm very grateful to you all and to you, Andreas. I hope that was food for thought. Thank you.
Olivier, thank you very much. It definitely was. Actually, thank you very much for the lively speech, for the also entertaining insights, and also for the pictures. I think I will not get the burning house out of my mind today. And special thanks from my side, because I'm not from the accountant side, that you did not make this too technical. I think you could have been very technical on the ESRS and other things, and sometimes it comes down very much to talking about the numbers, which you kind of avoided, I think, and this was very helpful for the greater respect of this topic. Yeah, but nevertheless, we do, maybe because of that, we do have some questions open. And one question I would like to ask is about the management. It is, how's the company's compensation structure for senior management and employees aligned with ESG objectives? What do you see here? Because, I mean, the fate of the company sometimes depends on the decisions of the management and their motivation. And so how is the connection in this area? What did you see so far?
Well, that is an excellent question, Andreas, and thank you very much. And I will not answer directly. I will answer by quoting a conversation I had with a CFO from one of your largest bank in Germany, who was actually explaining how within the bank they run an internal collaborative process, once again, to actually agree on the set of data on which they would now base part of the executive remuneration. And it is always interesting to also see the contrast between the public policy debate and the reality in business. I mean, this particular bank, I think, I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly, but I think 3-4 years ago, started developing, a very simple system based on a small set of data that was, agreed by consensus within the organization, and that would actually shape the incentives for senior executive. But at the same time, in the public policy debate, linking remuneration of executives to ESG performance, that was one of the things that was, discussed in the corporate sustainability, in the corporate governance sustainability directive, was seen as almost, a catastrophe or an insult to business and business executives. I mean, there is this disconnect very often between practice on what the lobbying bubble actually is talking about. And I really applauded to how this particular bank and this particular CFO had gone about that, building, a process internally to actually convince people of the need to change and also agree not a whole set of very difficult indicators to understand and work out, but a very small focus set with their imperfections, with their gaps, but creating change. And for me, that is an absolute, model of how we should be thinking. I think in a conversation, I remember telling this executive, it's a pity you're not involved in policy making and drafting laws.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, and of course, we got in a question here that is short and very much to the point, I think, and maybe one of the answers is, of course, the management should be the role model here. But the question goes, how do we go from we need to we are doing?
Huh. Well, that I think
share your recipe.
It's almost a question for a brain surgeon, I think. Now, in reality, it is not that difficult. I think there are two things we've lost in business. I mean, we're spending so much time running after emails, deadlines, and everything that we don't have what you are providing today, food for thought and time to think. Now, the way to change this, I think, is to regain a number of capacities that we've lost. So one is time. The other one is listening to one another. I mean, each of you, in a way, should try to remember when is the last time that I really paused and listened to a colleague who, preferably was challenging in his thinking. And instead of preparing my answer already in my mind, I put my, answering brain aside and really listen to what was being said. And in these transition labs that I mentioned, that we have, just put in place since a couple of years ago now, we always start by listening, and even doing exercises to relearn to listen and understand that the solution to your problem, Andreas, may be not with you, but with someone else. And conversely, that the obstacles to the solution that you would like to put in place are with me. And it's once you've understand that you can start collaborating, because at the end of the day, most of us always have the same purpose, the same goal. So it is important to recreate an environment where we can relearn to collaborate and start being focused not on our habits and daily, jobs, but really focused on regaining agency and collaborating to solve problems. So in these transition labs, once we've done that listening phase, and once we've reached a point where people identify their common goals, their common obstacles, we start helping them develop joint projects that are always multi-stakeholders, because again, we realize that you cannot solve these problems on your own. We're all interdependent. And it is in these interdependencies that lies the strength and the energy to solve problems collectively. So the second phase is really to develop what I would call portfolios of projects on which people can work together on, okay, with their bankers, with their suppliers, with their customers, with their regulators. I mean, we really need to enlarge the notion of stakeholders. And once these, portfolios of projects are developed, we need to look for the financing to do these projects. Here comes very often blended finance solutions. And we need to put in place, it's not project management. It's not project governance. It's something bigger because it has to be systemic. So it's really keeping everybody focused on their collective objective and helping them navigate the difficulties that they face. And because the exercise is collective, you always get the challenge that you need to adapt. I mean, it's great to have a transition plan, but very much, transition plans are kind of fixed. You've got your roadmap. The thing is that everything around this roadmap is in constant flux, in constant change. So you have to adapt along the way all the time. So that gives you a little bit of an idea.
Yeah, thank you. I think you mentioned several times, I've seen it in your slides, the aspect and the concept of collaboration. And one of our viewers here has a question on this, because he or she says the importance of cooperation was emphasized, but more partners, the more partners there are, the less efficient and targeted they may be. How can these problems be solved in global cooperation? You mentioned your like workshops or whatever. So what is the concept of relearning collaboration in a topic that sometimes also has to deal with ideology and things like this?
Well, ideology is a huge problem. And we now very often are blocked by this thing we've got, in our head, on our ideological, certainties. While in reality, this is an extremely factual issue. We've got the data, we've got the evidence, we see the effects. So we need to move away from ideology and be just open-minded to the solutions that we can collectively develop. And that, again, I think, has a sort of competitive dimension, okay? Because ideology is really a dividing, mechanism. So that is also part of what we do with these listening exercises. It's getting people to understand that, there is not one person wearing, the red t-shirt and another one wearing the blue t-shirt. I didn't spoke about caps in the US, okay? But it's really about recreating this common understanding. But in reality, even if we are competing, as businesses, we have a joint interest to get the entire system working, okay? So that, I think, is something that we're really losing sight of very often. So we need, again, to make the time and to understand each other. And very often in these, projects, we see these ideological barriers coming up. In one of the first projects we did, that was our pilot project, it was in Wales. And our objective was to really transform actually the entire food supply chain in Wales and the food production system. So we brought together everybody. I mean, the farmers, the NGOs, the bankers, the public authorities, the school, the health system, and we got them to collaborate. And one of our advisor in Wales was basically calling us crazy and taking a big risk, because the farmers actually think that the NGOs are devilish, are just an emanation of the devil, and that they have no hesitation to come up with guns when they face them. Conversely, the NGOs think that they are dreadful, conservative, narrow-minded, arrogant, unchangeable people. And with the magic of very basic exercises, we got these people to collaborate and to work together and to understand, their common objective. I hope that partly answers your question.
It does, and at the same time, it triggers obviously the people here because in the chat I already have two signups for these kind of collaboration labs. So no more advertising needed here. But another one is more interested in how do these transition labs tools, how do they work that you're mentioning? How do you solve problems with them? How is participation arranged? Obviously, this is seen as a very helpful tool to get things forward.
It's going to be difficult to do without further advertisements, actually, but I'll try my best.
Okay. Please do.
So I think the most important of the labs I share is what we call the applied labs, because these are the labs that are really on the ground trying to collaborate at system level with different stakeholders. And I probably talked enough about this one already, okay? Mm-hmm. And we worked on a couple of examples, well, on a number of examples in regions. Looking at transitioning entire regions. The company is based in the UK, so we mostly do work in the UK right now. And it's a very young, actually, venture because we're only 3 years old, okay? But these are the labs that we practice most and the ones that I talked about mostly today. But we also have done what we call business labs, which are really more looking within a business, but applying the same methodology of collaboration. And that usually produces two very important things. One is what I call strategic alignment, because how many of us have had the experience but the engineers and the marketing people and the finance people just don't understand each other. And sometimes it is very difficult to get them to build a shared understanding and cooperate. So I think this is one thing that is extremely important as a tool to create strategic alignment within an organization. It also, interestingly, enhances team spirit within the organization and building the sort of common knowledge bases, the common information bases that that you need, sorry, to understand the challenges, okay? And once you have that, what we see is that you've got a mindset of innovation that actually flows through the entire organization. I mean, from the board to people on the factory floor. And that, I think, is an extremely important tool to start, in reality, transforming the organization. So having a common knowledge base of what are the problems that we face, how they can unfold in the near future, what is the level of uncertainty, how could we adapt, how do we need to transform, how we are all within this organization collectively responsible for this, and how we can have a methodology basically that helps everyone engage, be committed, and be contributing to these transformation goals. Much more effective than having a plan bombarded on people who don't understand what you have the plan and why I would need to change. So that gives you maybe another example of how the labs work.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm pretty sure there will be some follow-up questions that may reach you after the webinar. So
always happy to engage. So please feel
good.
free to email me.
Very good. I would like to change to something quite different, but I can't go without asking about artificial intelligence, because it's kind of solution to everything we have, from demographic problems and whatsoever. So if we're talking about AI, blockchain, big data analytics, how can these tools help companies to collect, analyze, and report ESG data more effectively? Do you think there is already something in progress?
Well, I think there are two things here. And before going into the use of AI for reporting, I think AI right now is a little bit seen as magic. And I think it is important that we slightly distance ourselves from the marketing hype that's going on and understand not AI, I would be unable to do so, but understand the basic logic against which it functions, okay? And not forget that AI is actually developed by ourselves. So, a good example of that, is the number of AI recruitment, for instance, tools that have been developed and that were found to discriminate, heavily discriminate, people of color, women, minorities, whatever, okay, or unusual CVs. Well, very often the unusual CV, I have one, so I can talk about this. The unusual CVs have a wealth of experience that can really contribute to an organization. So I think we need to not lose our critical distance. Okay, that's a one thing. When it comes to artificial intelligence and the environmental challenges that we face, to be honest, I'm in two minds. They are extremely positive applications, absolutely fantastic, especially in farming, where AI can help you save almost 40% of the water used and the energy consumption. I mean, that is fabulous and something that not only we need to do, but we, with our little brains, would be unable to achieve. So that is a very encouraging and very positive side of AI. At the same time, okay, there is a very concerning side of AI, which is its consumption of energy and its carbon emissions, which are growing at an unprecedented speed, and that start becoming a problem. I mean, we produce right now, AI is producing more or less the same impact as the aviation industry. except that the aviation industry, has a unclear growth right now, let's say, while AI is expanding, okay, at full speed. So let's not forget the environmental impact of AI. And let's not start thinking that, there is only the bright side. There is always, the two elements. It's like on the balance sheet, okay? You've got assets and liabilities. So that is one element. Now, when it comes to data collection, I think, and I'm sorry if I use quite colloquial language, but I think the good old principle of bullshit in, bullshit out continues applying. It's not gone by magic, okay? But it is extremely useful, actually, to reduce some burdens and automate some processes that do not necessarily require, human intervention. There's also a public policy dimension to the issue, which is that policymakers very often think that, technology is going to relieve them from having to produce rational, consistent legislation, and that technology is going to sort out the mess, basically. Like, imagine a continent where you would have 27 member states, and that all these member states would have their own interpretation of the European directives. It's unfortunately a reality, okay? And technology is not going to help you basically bridge what is poorly conceived. So I think just like AI and the need for our own brains to conceive the algorithm that go into the system, I think we cannot hope AI to actually solve the problems that we've created, for instance, in overburdening, inconsistent, incoherent regulation. And we've got a little bit of that around, don't we?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for the comprehensive answer, and very much thank you also for reminding us about the energy consumption problem of AI. Same we saw in Bitcoin, and this is not to be forgotten, of course, if we're talking ESG. As we are getting closer to 10, there's one last question I have here, and this maybe brings us back to what I consider to be also the heart of accountancy, which is the cost of capital and financing, and the financing strategies the companies have. With the growing demands and expectations of the investors, how does this ESG affect these areas?
Well, I think the question is not yet how. The question is how this is being used and with what objective in mind. And I think our way of thinking seems to be quite unstable in this respect. We see, especially on the other side of the ocean, that the thinking is shifting with a lot of support for ESG and a lot of support for integrating ESG factors into investment decisions. And all of a sudden, depending on flux in the public policy debate, maybe depending on the outcome of the forthcoming elections as well, you see that a number of people are backtracking, and so that's one dimension. I think the other dimension is that again, I think we are very often losing sight of the collective systemic dimension. And investment decisions are basically made in a particular company, in a particular sector, in a particular country, sometimes losing sight of the global effect that needs to be taken into account as well. Let me take another example when we talk about reporting, okay? I mean, Germany has a fantastic car manufacturing industry. And when I look at the amount of progress that has been made on energy efficiency of cars. And I'm talking about, normal engines. I'm not talking about electric cars, okay? I'm talking about your good old, gasoline or diesel car. If you look back in 20 years, we've achieved incredible progress and incredible energy efficiencies. I mean, at the level of the car produced, what engineers have done is absolutely fascinating. The problem remains, but if you look at the level of the fleet, the problem has increased and the situation is deteriorating very quickly. And I think this logic of bottom-up, approach to reporting, for instance, and to performance is misleading us, because I may be doing very well. You may be doing very well, Andreas, but collectively, you plus me may be producing a catastrophe. And I think we also here need to reflect on how we think and how we build models, okay? I personally believe, as difficult as it may be, that a budget approach, starting from what we can afford and trickling down, would be a much more rational way of going at this issue. Because again, at the entity level, at the unit produced level, we are fantastic. But when we aggregate, we are terrible.
Well, thank you very much, Olivier. This is a very good closing remark. You brought up the German car industry. If we would dive into this discussion, it would probably take us another hour these days, especially. I want to close this session first by thanks to the audience for the participation and also for the lively chat we had this time and for the question. Thank you very much to the audience, and also special thanks to you, Olivier, for all the insights, and especially also for presenting us the Transition Labs concept, which obviously is of high interest for the financial community here in Frankfurt and around. So thank you very much for being with us today. We will hopefully share some information on the Frankfurt Main Finance website, and hopefully have you back here maybe in 1 year's time with good and better news. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure, and I wish everybody a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, and bye-bye to everybody.
Bye.